Okay, we're going to begin learning. I know we're all very excited to be here and discuss cheesecake, but we're going to start our Suda Shlishit learning. Okay, so we are learning about Parshat Nasso, which, as I mentioned, we've been getting into over the course of the past week. Mark was joking he's been reading it for a long time because it's true. We've been reading it for a whole week as we sort of make our way through stalling. Sometimes when we get to a season of Chagim, a season of holidays that fall on Shabbat, then we kind of wind up stalling the Parsha cycle because we're not reading the Parsha on Shabbat, which means that even though we read that Parsha in the Shabbat afternoon and in the weekday cycle in the mornings, we're not reading it on Shabbat mornings. We're getting a little sneak preview, but we're not getting the whole thing. So I am pulling out a piece from later in Nasso, a piece that we neither read on weekday mornings, nor will we read in the triennial cycle, the first third that's pulled out for those of us who will read, who will hear this on Shabbat morning, somewhere where we're only reading the first third. It's from the 6th chapter of the book of Numbers when we are reading about the Nazir. Like I said to a couple of you as I was passing this out, this is more fun if you don't read ahead, okay? So let's see if we can take this one piece at a time. So Numbers 6:2. Daber el bnei Yisrael, va'amarta alehem, speak to the children of Israel, saying to them, Ish o isha, a man or a woman. So this is going to be a law or a principle that applies to somebody of either gender. Ki yafli, who yafli, I'm not going to translate that for now. Lindor neder, to vow a vow, or if I were translating as Everett Fox, to vow, yes, vow, to be a Nazir, Lindor Neder Nazir, which is a Nazarite's vow. It is a word unto itself. Nazir is a distinctive category of person, rather it is a category of being. It is a category one can set themselves apart to be. So one can be a Nazir. One can be a person in a category of Nazir. It is a status, and it is also the way that one is referred to when in that status. Lehazir ladonai. Really, it's saying, that is to say, lehazir, to set oneself apart from, as in to set oneself apart from society, from stuff, from life, from a blank, kind of, it's not filled in there. To set oneself apart, la donai, for the sake of God. We're only really going to pick apart one little tiny piece of this verse for a second, okay? Rabbi Nachman of Bretzlav has a commentary on this verse that I want us to linger on a little bit that I never thought about before. Now, a Nazarite, before we get into this, a Nazarite, are we familiar with this idea of a Nazir? You had nods, the idea of a Nazir. A Nazir, we're going to discuss, is an ascetic person. It's somebody who chooses to set themselves apart because even though, generally speaking, the Jewish people is not a self-restrictive people, this is a status where one takes upon themselves additional restrictions such that it sets themselves apart from the rest of people among the Jewish people in order to be set aside for God in this regard. And the verb that's used in this verse is curious for some people. It's curious for Rabbi Nachman of Bretzlav, who's one of our Hasidic masters. Some of us know some other teachings of Rabbi Nachman. From the teachings of Rabbi Nachman, from Likutei Moharan, we find the following. We're not going to dig too deeply into it because it's thick stuff, but I really like it. V'tikuno shel hafla'a hazot. Okay, what's a tikkun? You just went to one, right? Some of you. A study session, yeah. So we call that a tikkun leil shavuot. Why do we call a tikkun, by the way? It's one of the reasons I chose this, because I think it's a funny thing that we call it a tikkun. Because it's what? What do we do on leil shavuot? We study, but what are we doing with ourselves studying? We sort of, it's not chavruta, we're in a big group, but it could be chavruta. Some people just stay up all night at home. That's so much more boring though, right, Brant? We'd rather do it in a group. That's why we do it here. Right, tikkun litakein, the verb litakein from which this comes means to fix. And the reason why I say fix and not repair is because fix in English also has the connotation of setting, as in if I'm going to fix something with glue or affix something with glue, I can set that thing. I can set it in that and it's going to fix it, right? It will be fixed in cement. It'll be fixed in glue, right? So tikkun can be a fix. It can be, I'm affixed in prayer all evening. So a tikkun leil shavuot is really that connotation. I am affixed in that. It's not necessarily for repair. That's not the connotation being used. However, that is the connotation that's being used here in this teaching from Rabbi Nachman. The tikuno shel hafla'a hazot. What's a hafla'a? What's a pele, which is in the center of that? A wonder. Boy, people really knew that one. I thought you were going to say a candy bar, because pele is like a very popular candy bar in Israel. So, or a miku pellet, right? Or miku fellet, if you're doing the right grammar, miku pellet or a pele. Like lots of candy bars are named Wonder, like Wonder chocolate or whatever. So tikuno shel hafla'a hazot, the repair or the fix of this wonder. What wonder is he referring to in this verse? What's the wonder? The Nazir. This person who's taking on the status of Nazir. What is it? It's going to be a tikkun of some kind. It's going to be a repair of some kind. Hainu shel silukan shel chachamim. As in the passing of the sages, tikkuno, its fix, he's just re-emphasizing this word, hafla'a shel neder. It is the wonder of the vow, as in the vow itself. Bivchinat, as in from this source. Ki yafli lindor neder. This is the verse that we just shared. Ki al yedei ha-neder, for by the hands of this vow, meaning by means of this vow, hu ole lashorish shehachachamim mushrashim sham. By means of this vow, he goes up to the root of the source in which the sages themselves are rooted, which he calls Hainu Bechinat Pliyot Chochma, that there's a wondrousness to wisdom. Skip the source that's in parentheses. V'yodea umakir ma'alot chachamim. So he, meaning the person who takes on the Nazarite vow, makir, he comes to know the heights of the sages, or as this person translates it, the virtues of the sages, but ma'alot are like the levels, the heights of. The al yedei zeh, and by means of this, hushav uma'amin bahem, he comes back and he returns to having faith in them. So it's a tikkun, it is a return. It is a wondrous, it is actually a miraculous pele return, and it's a fix to what? What is it repairing? Hushav ma'amin bahem. So what happened before? Perhaps they were having trouble believing in them. Why might one take on a Nazarite vow according to we're trying to get his read, not our read. What is the read of Rabbi Nachman? If you lack faith, you might need to take a dive. Not that you need to, but that it actually might be the reason that is prescribed here, that they're prescribing a neder, a vow, for those who do not believe, who are having trouble believing, in order for them to be able to make a tikkun, a fix in their faith. Because once one goes and takes on a vow of asceticism, of restricting themselves from all of the pleasures of life, perhaps they can reunite with their sense of faith, or at least understand the wisdom that the sages have found. This is one read, this is one possible read of why one would possibly want to go and become a Nazir. And I wanted to start here, and then I'll come to you, Sandra. I see you have a thought. I wanted to start here because I want us to be audacious in the way that we think about why one might possibly want to take on the identity, the status of being a Nazir, because it might not be what we think that it is. Sandra.
So I just want to point out this distinction and pointing it out as the question. So Rabbi Nachman is talking about a lack of faith in the wisdom of the sages.
Right, Rabbi Nachman is talking about a lack of faith in the wisdom of the sages, correct?
I think of asceticism as putting aside worldly pleasures in order to get closer to God, and this has to do with the sages.
Right.
Faith in the wisdom of the sages, which perhaps maybe what he means by that is the wisdom of the sages is God or whatever. I don't know.
Right. So it is a very good question, which is if there is a wisdom that's rooted in the sages, and then you've got this idea of a neder that is to lehazir ladonai, right? You're supposed to take on a vow that's supposed to separate you for the sake of Adonai. And so this person is doubting the wisdom of the sages, but you're becoming a Nazir for Adonai. And so where's the marriage of these two things? One possibility is that Rabbi Nachman thinks that they're one and the same and doesn't distinguish between the two things. Another possibility is that the idea here is a reunification of action and belief. Okay, so what we're talking about is I'm going through the motions, but I don't necessarily believe in them, which is an utterly relatable idea, I think, for anyone who has participated in ritual Jewish life. I think anyone and everyone who has participated at some point in ritual Jewish life has encountered the idea that you can be going through the motions of Jewish life and feel disconnected from the wisdom of the sages, so to speak. Like, why would they have fixed this practice? I don't necessarily understand this, and that this might be a tikkun to that. I think that's a possibility as well. I see Brand has an idea.
The thing I like about this is it's a recognition that not everybody's the same.
Do you think it's a recognition that not everybody is the same? Okay.
People who have difficulties with faith. This is in a biblical context. I'm saying is that we know that today that this isn't for everybody. But maybe back then, this is too young to recognize there are some people whose faith is hard to come by. And you can take this vow and you can delve more into it, and maybe that will help you. But it's a recognition that we are not all the same.
That's wonderful.
Of the differences between us, and that this Nachman understands that we have to care for and we have to recognize that somebody's different and we can treat it in this way.
Great, Brant. I like that read of it a lot. This idea that there might be people for whom the only way to really reground yourself when you're feeling a little floundering or lost in faith is to actually go a little harder in your own personal practice, to take on a time-bound, limited length of time where asceticism is your practice so that you can get back into it, so that you can believe again, so that you feel you're in it again. And that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everybody needs it, not everybody wants it, but it's an option.
Yeah.
And it's an acknowledgement that not everybody is going to take it on, but it's there. I want us to move on to the next section. Hold on to your additional thoughts. It's not to cut you off, but it's to make sure that we get through all of our sources. We're going to continue to explore the ideas of this asceticism that comes out of the notion of the Nazir. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that deprivation and less about the details of what a Nazir actually does or doesn't do, and more about what actually is this asceticism. And this wisdom comes from Dr. Erica Brown. I am very, very lucky because Dr. Erica Brown was just coming into Washington, D.C. when I was an undergraduate, and I got to have her as a professor individually. She's now a very well-known Talmud scholar and a teacher of teachers in Washington, D.C. area. She's the scholar in residence perpetually at, I don't remember what her chair is, but she has a chair at the DC Federation, and she is a remarkable teacher. She has podcasts and books, and I recommend her highly. She wrote a book called Leadership in the Wilderness. It's not just about Bamidbar, but she has some wonderful teachings on Bamidbar, and we're going to look at two of her teachings. One is about the Nazir and the taking on of asceticism, and the next one we're going to read is about what happens when the Nazir leaves that status and why. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud because I have the microphone and I want everybody to hear. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to ask you a question. The question that I'm going to ask of you is, what, in this particular case, is the difference between a Nazir, like the status of a Nazir, based on the description that we're reading here, and what we talk about today as deprivation or depriving ourselves for self-righteous or righteous reasons? What is the way that Dr. Brown is describing the notion of Nazir as a form of self-deprivation, and the way that we in 5783 in 2023 think of and talk about self-deprivation? Okay, so I'm going to read her description. Jewish asceticism, unlike many other forms of asceticism, does not seek to separate mind or soul from body, focusing instead on the mind itself without the trappings of physical pain or deprivation. The Talmud specifically questioned why a Nazirite did not abstain from food instead of wine, and answered that not having food would weaken him. The goal of abstention is not to weaken the body's constitution, but to free the mind from distraction or distortion, such as would be caused by alcohol consumption. In the words of the 16th century Italian exegete, meaning the commentator who we know, Rabbi Avadia Sforno, the Nazir consecrated himself to God to, quote, engage in God's Torah, follow God's ways, and cling to God. The idea is neither to punish nor to weaken the body, but rather to enhance one's capacity for transcendence. What is the difference between the way that we talk about deprivation today and the way that this is describing self-deprivation for self-righteous or self-beneficial reasons?
Like a diet?
Any form of depriving oneself, any form of holding back for personally beneficial or self-righteous reasons. Alan, since I haven't heard from you yet.
Seems to be more for a sense of greater clarity of the mind, and not to deal with depriving the body of anything, but depriving oneself of the pleasures in life. And since that not drinking alcohol is viewed for the Nazir, it's not a sense, well, I'm depriving myself of alcohol. It's to ensure that my mind can be as clear as possible.
So it's not necessarily deprivation for the sake of deprivation, it's deprivation for the sake of clarity. So whatever it will take for the sake of clarity, except that it's very specifically prescribed, right? It's not just whatever might take me personally or you, Alan, personally to get to clarity. It's specifically prescribed. However, it seems that the purpose is for clarity. I saw Bob's hand, and then I'll come over here.
I'm just gonna say, it might be about intensifying the experience, the haspalah, or that's the word, the wonder of it all.
Oh, the hafla'ah, yes. The wondrousness, yes, very
It's
good.
not about depriving, it's about intensifying.
So it's not about deprivation actually at all in your estimation. Even though there is deprivation to get there, it's not really about the deprivation itself whatsoever. It's about the wondrousness that one can experience through deprivation. Bob, how does one experience wondrousness through deprivation?
No, it's not the deprivation, it's just intensifying the experience. Intensifying the experience of Torah and being close to God.
How is one going about doing that?
By taking out the debris, by removing the debris,
By removing the detritus, by removing the debris, by removing the extra stuff. So it's not deprivation at all. I love this. It's like, no, don't even think of it as deprivation. What we're saying to you is get rid of distraction, get rid of the other stuff. We're not saying it's deprivation at all. It's actually, you don't even realize this. It's not deprivation. It's get rid of this other stuff, because when you do, get ready. It's going to be amazing. The clarity, what you'll experience and what you'll have. I love that. That's really wonderful. Thank you for going down that path with me. Gary, yeah.
Couple points. One, I think that it's like fasting for your own people. You get a closeness to God. And I think the Nazareth point is not to feel good, but to get closer to God. And that was their option. And also, I think that it's almost like Lent, especially Lent. You're giving up something, whatever it is, and it's supposed to be something that's important to you. So it's a 2-month period, whatever the month period is for Lent. You're able to, you want to give something that is important to you, and as a reminder of your closeness to God.
So on the one hand, so I've heard two things. So one is, it really is about closeness to God ultimately. It's not just about the wondrousness that you can achieve or the clarity that you can achieve. It is about this neder that separates you from other things such that it brings you closer to God. And two is that you're right, that there are emulations of this in other parallel traditions, that Christians do emulate this through Lent in many ways, through a sort of there's a lot more autonomy in it. There's a self-led process of depriving oneself, or of, we're not going to say deprivation, clearing the debris of something distracting, right? I'm not going to eat cookies or whatever it is for that period of time, but I'm clearing those things away because I want to get closer to God during that time. Good. Alan, I'll give you a double point, and then we're going to move to the other text.
Just a question, what if you're talking about not drinking wine, there's also a prohibition on cutting one's hair, letting one's hair grow. That I don't see clearly how that would help one become more focused.
Great. That's a wonderful question. So Alan asked the question, how is it differently than wine might do? How is it that not cutting one's hair might possibly lead that person to a place of more clarity or the wondrousness or deprivation? I want to say that where we're going to land, the very final source that we're going to read tonight, is going to take us to a place of saying the hair has such an extraordinarily profound point, a ritual beginning and a ritual end, that you're going to be wowed by her take on it. So I'm not even going to answer it, because I want Dr. Alana Kirshan, I want her to answer for us, okay?
It shows I didn't read ahead.
I can tell, you definitely didn't read ahead. Alana Kirshan is going to answer that for us. Did you want to offer something?
Without reading ahead, and I don't want to spoil it, but and I did not read ahead. But it seems to me that in my hair is represented by vanity, and vanity is so outward facing, and if what we're trying to do is create a closeness to God, that's some of the detritus that you have to get rid of.
Right. So Sandra says, it's hair is the ultimate symbol of vanity, and what what we're doing here at this point is to try to clear the way, right? If we're taking Bob's view of this, right, we're trying to take away this focus on self in the way that we cover mirrors during Shiva, that we take away this the self-awareness, this focus on our own hair and on the need to look a particular way. That's not the route that many of our commentators take. And I bet you someone out there has said as much. I think that it actually speaks to me more as a modern, right? Your explanation, Sandra, speaks to me more in 2023. And I wonder, but I don't know for certain because I'm not a historian of this period as much as I'm a reader of the secret literature, if in fact longer hair would have been a sign of more or less vanity. And so part of me just doesn't know what it would have meant to grow the hair any longer. So I have questions about that, but you're going to see that we're about to talk about hair a lot. So let's look at the next source. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read this for you because it's such a great long exploration about hair. Here we go. So this is about the end of Nazardom, the end of being a Nazir, and the end of the ritual. Here we go. This is also Dr. Erica Brown on the Nazir. The most curious aspect of the sacrifice is not how one explains its purpose, but how one explains its details. The traditional sacrificial elements are present: 2 lambs and a ram, unleavened cakes of choice flour, and unleavened wafers and oil, all of which are presented to the priest. However, in an often neglected detail, the Nazirite then himself contributes to the presentation of the offering. The Nazirite shall then shave his consecrated hair at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and take the locks of his consecrated hair and put them on the fire that is under the sacrifice of well-being. It is often overlooked, by the way. She continues, an integral part of transitioning the Nazirite back to ordinary life was not only the cutting of his hair, but also the offering of his hair on the altar as part of the sacrifice itself. He had to watch his own hair, the most prominent aspect of his ascetic commitment, go up in heavenly smoke, creating the mental readiness to rejoin the world of distraction and mental static. Watching his hair burn created total recognition that his break from the often banal world of human engagement was over. Similarly, God commanded Yechezkel to take a razor and cut the hair on his head and beard, and then divide the hair into sections to mimic the takeover of Yerushalayim, which was to be segmented after a conquest. Take also a few hairs from there and tie them up in your skirts, and take some more of them and cast them into the fire. From this the fire shall go out upon the whole house of Israel. Like the Nazirite, the prophet must burn his own hair to place himself in the drama of the moment. He set fire to part of himself. Burning hair creates an unpleasant stench. In the Talmudic tractate Shabbat, in a discussion of material that can serve as wicks for Shabbat lights, the use of hair is prohibited because it does not burn, it scorches. Thus, in sight and smell, the hair offering must have given the Nazirite pause. As a ritualist, I love this so much. Before I say anything or ask any more, any first reactions to this?
What's interesting to me is that in a world of biblical existence, where they don't have a television, they don't have an iPhone, there's sure a lot of attention paid to distractions in life.
So Brant points out that even though today we say, look at all the distractions in our world, and we name all of these contemporary problems of modernity, of phones and devices and all that, even with none of that,
A world of distraction and mental static.
right, a world of distraction and mental static way, way before this existed. There's nothing new about distraction.
Right.
Or should we be burning our right? Should we be burning our what's the equivalent in we like create a list of contacts or something, then we burn it at the end.
Recognition of sometimes the physical is necessary to accomplish the mental, and so I accept that ritual has a place to play, just like we carry around the Torahs and we do certain things, and this burning ritual and the stench and all that, it's symbolic of the break, I get it. But I'm saying is that all throughout religion, particularly the Jewish religion, we have various physical manifestations in order to help us understand what we're doing, custom stuff. So this is really that much different, although, you know, one of the things I always have I ask about these things is, does this really ever take place? I don't know.
Right. So you said three really important things. One is, it really is remarkable that long ago, the same conversation was taking place. It really is nothing new. There have always been distractions. Human beings will always be distracted from the spiritual highs by mundane and banal things all around us. Number two is, there's something about attacking the spiritual distress in our lives through physically manifest rituals. And that is why my work as in creating and doing rituals is so continues to compel me over and over again to create and recreate ritual, because I think that it's very hard to deal with spiritual distress, or to kind of get through and cut through that static, to cut through that noise without actually manifesting it. And three is, I agree, it's very hard to know how much of this actually ever took place, but the notion of it, even as a fairy tale, is powerful. And that's why we're studying it in its setting. But it is a good question, how much of it ever really did. I saw Sandra's hand, and then I want us to get to this folk tale that's here. It's Jews anyway. The joke was the two lawyers can't stop talking, but we're all a bunch of Jews. We're just talking.
Two Jews, three opinions.
That's right.
Two Jews, three views.
Yeah.
I found the concept, the visceralness of burning the hair to be very, like, that in and of itself made me pause and wonder, right? Like, it was like, I can picture shaving the hair off and burning it. Like, that's very powerful. We're all very attached to our hair. Like, there are lots of rituals.
It is growing out of our head. Yes, we were all very attached to our hair because it is growing out of our head. But you're right. There is a really visceral nature.
We cover their hair. We put a kippah on. Like, it's part of our identity. It's part of our identity.
Right.
But it's also part of our identity ritual. And to shave it off after growing it, especially my sister-in-law was cut out about me, and she did not cut her hair for the whole year. Suddenly her hair would that had been here was down to here, and that first cut, or the cutting of a boy's hair at 3, which is in the concept, there's something very powerful about that, and the concept, and I don't know if I'm not thinking it's spiritual, but that concept of shaving it all off after a whole year and putting it there and burning it, it's like, it's literally taking a piece of yourself and letting it go.
Yeah, I think that you're right that there is this profound nature to the shift that happens in a person that is so amazingly counter to this idea that we would name it as vanity, to focus so much on hair. And yet, when somebody goes from having super long hair because of something like avelut, and then all of a sudden cuts it, or somebody who we've known to have simply shoulder length hair, but they have to cut it because they're about to go through a cancer treatment, or a young boy who's never had his hair cut before and is suddenly cut, or a young girl for that matter, and the first haircut, all of a sudden it changes. On the one hand, it's just hair. And on the other hand, it is quite literally attached to us. And there is a reason why it's not only visceral because it's coming off of our head, but also I'm really moved by the potency of this idea that when you burn hair, it smells different. There's something about it. It is a different kind of offering. It changes the offering that's being brought forward. And I want us to finish with Alana Kershan's take on this, because she gives us the takeaway. She's going to give us the takeaway from this that gives us the modern the modern chap, the modern walk away with a something to hold in your hand about this. And Alana wrote If All the Seas Were Ink. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I will get a copy of it to you if you haven't read it yet. It is a book about her experience as a Talmud scholar and also as a mom going through divorce. Alana lived in Jerusalem at the same time that I did. As she studied Talmud, every time she finished a parak, she would summarize it with a limerick, and then she would teach that limerick. And it was a way of us learning it all together as a community at Kedem, Zichrono Livracha. It was a great community in Jerusalem. We used to daven together on Emek Raphaim. And she has such a gift for teaching about Talmud and about rabbinic sources on our sacred texts. And she brings together sort of very often classic American literature together with our rabbinic teachings, and she does exactly that here. So here is her final teaching. But another useful intertext, albeit one that came much later, is the famous O. Henry story, The Gift of the Magi, in which the heroine also examines her reflection and is struck by her hair. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. Della sells her hair so that she might have enough money to purchase a Christmas present for her beloved husband, Jim. She buys him a fob for his watch, unaware that he has sold his watch to buy her combs for her rippling, shining hair. By the end of the story, it is clear that Della and Jim have given each other the most meaningful gifts of all, because their gifts symbolize the sacrifices they are prepared to make for one another. Perhaps we should not be surprised then that the Nazir is commanded to grow long hair and then offer it in sacrifice to God. In the Torah's synecdoche, the hair of the Nazir substitutes for the entire person. And thus the Nazir sacrifices his or her hair as a way of symbolically sacrificing himself or herself. Hair is a renewable part of our body. When we give it up, we are not endangering ourselves, but rather enacting the gesture of sacrificing something we value deeply for the sake of another ideal. We might shave our hair to burn on the altar or sell it to buy a present for a spouse, but we might also donate our hair to organizations that make wigs for cancer patients, thereby allowing someone else to feel beautiful again. The Nazir challenges us to think about other creative ways we can give of ourselves and how, in so doing, we might find ourselves transformed.
Box of love. That's what it's called.
So what Ilana says is the only purpose in growing one's hair long is to give it away. My message to you from this teaching is that the asceticism that's set forward in Judaism through the example of the Nazir, the thing that is so wondrous here is the notion that we would go about figuring out what it is that we can completely give of ourselves and give up of ourselves, that neither robs ourselves of our humanity, but also allows for us to say, I am only doing this exclusively for the sake of going through the process of spiritual renewal, not for personal gain, not because I'm on some other kind of a journey, not because I've been pressured to do so, not because this is what my community is doing, because I am on this journey and my intention is that at the end of this process, I am able to give this over and to give this up. The hair is one great example, but as Brant reminded us, we are all different and we all have different ways of doing this and of giving this. And it's a path that we can go on in a way that we can emulate this teaching of the Nazir. And if you have any other takeaway from this, it's please read more Ilana Gershan. She's a really good writer and teacher. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.